Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoterica on our continuing series on the MiSter FPGA DE10 Nano project. And we got another Sega Saturn testing video for you today because the core was updated again. Some games have been promoted to working from not working whatsoever, and I got some user requests in here as well. Do me a huge favor before we get going, go down below, hit like, subscribe, and that notification bell definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. And we also have SRG320's Patreon link as he could use this support in general. But right off the top, one of my favorite new experiences from this core is just how good Virtua Fighter Remix is working. Now this doesn't really have any audio whatsoever, you're going to be playing it mute, and there might be a graphical glitch here or there. There's a few blue lines through some of the character portraits, but the game is running and it feels like Virtua Fighter Remix on the Sega Saturn. The controls are responsive, the 3D polygons are drawing in well, that infinite plane that is the floor that you were fighting on. Everything seems to be working perfectly fine until it will freeze sometimes. I'll go over that later in the video, but as long as Virtua Fighter Remix is running, it runs perfectly great. And you guys have been asking me to test this one again, so it is one of the viewer requests, and obviously it's one of the more popular games on the Sega Saturn, and it's so much better of a version than the original Virtua Fighter they released on the console. I remember getting that as a pack-in game, and it was just not very good, especially compared to what was in arcades. It was definitely a disappointment. So not only is Remix the much better version of Virtua Fighter on the Saturn, with the newest core code from SRG320, it's working really well. Another game that's working near perfectly, for better or worse, is Contra Legacy of War. Now compared to the 2D Contras, this is not a great game, but I do love how they do this animated 2D intro here, and all of that is working great in the core. Moving over to the gameplay side, they made Contra 3D, probably not the best decision in the world. You have 2D sprite elements and 3D polygons on screen at once, and this game is just running exactly how I would anticipate it to. It is running fast, it's running smooth, I don't see any issues with the graphics whatsoever, and the sound feels like it's 95% of the way there. Unfortunately, nothing in FPGA can improve how much fun this game is. It's not as bad as you've been told, but it's not as good as anything 2D Contra whatsoever. But as an example of what is now working on the core, I tested this earlier on and it did not work whatsoever. It's smooth, it's responsive, and it's a really nice way to see all of the Saturn's graphical capabilities at once. We have 2D elements, we have 3D elements, texture mapped elements, and they are all just working how you would expect an original copy of Contra Legacy of War to work. It's just not the most fun game, but it's a great testing example. Now another game that's been promoted to working sort of is Capcom Generations 2. This is all of the Ghouls and Ghosts or Dai Makimura games as a compilation. If I try to boot the Super Nintendo game, it just goes to now loading and then it black screens out, does not work whatsoever. If I choose Dai Makimura, the one that would have been on the Sega Genesis, this loads and it does get into game. Now your results may vary, of course this is always a testing work in progress, but this is what I found. Some of the times you can get into all of the games, sometimes some don't refuse to load whatsoever, but once you get in, it doesn't have really much audio whatsoever. You'll get a few sound effects here and there, but gameplay wise, this is the game that I know and I love this compilation. I've owned it on the original Sega Saturn for over 15 years now. It definitely has a permanent place in my collection, even if I own the games on the respective arcade boards and consoles. But this is just working, and it didn't used to work before the new core update with new code, so it's great to see games that weren't working before get promoted to that working status. It means the core is becoming more mature, more code has been put into it, and things that didn't used to work have now been patched up to work. Doesn't make the game any easier though. Seeing the ending on a double loop of this game is going to be quite difficult, but I can't wait to try on MiSter when it is running perfectly, because it is just that good of a game. Now speaking of 2D things, Bubble Bobble featuring Rainbow Islands is also working, and I think it's working perfectly, and it's got great audio, so go ahead and listen for like 45 seconds and I will be right back. If you heard any static in the Rainbow Islands audio example, that's because I had to lift the audio levels up. They were quite quiet, so any static in there is just because I lifted the audio levels maybe further than they normally would go, but the bubble music sounds perfect. Now on to something that is synonymous with the Sega Saturn that's an absolutely hilarious game that I was only able to boot on the newest core and never got Mr. Bones to work is, well, Mr. Bones. It is classic Sega Saturn. It is such a weird game. It's basically like a hard rock skeleton. It's got a huge sense of humor. I don't know if it's the best game whatsoever, but it's an interesting technical example because in the first level here, which stumps a lot of people, you have 3D polygonal skeletons running around, and you also have FMV playing in the background and foreground as well. So it's showing an interesting mix of what VDP1 and VDP2 can do with putting, for lack of a better term, mixed media up on screen. And again, it's a game that's been promoted to working, at least for me, because I tested this early November and it froze on loading. So if you really want to check Mr. Bones out, and if you never played it before, I highly recommend it. It's not the best game in the world, but it certainly has a great sense of humor, and that's all we really need when it comes to a game, just to try it out. And when you do die, you get this hilarious cutscene of Mr. Bones falling into the abyss. I just don't know what he's about, but he's interesting. Now moving on to some shmups, you guys always want to talk about that. We have the Thunder Force Gold Packs. I was not able to get the first game to boot, but the second game in the series worked perfectly fine, and the FMV intro is working as well. Now generally you're supposed to skip the FMV intros, but I do like to capture them just to show you something, and I love that Thunder Force AC has the PCB photo on the option. But right when you get into Thunder Force 4, if there's anything wrong with this game, I cannot tell. Now, I'm not the biggest player of Thunder Force, so if you're a huge fan, leave me a comment down below and tell me, is this working exactly how you would expect, or do you see or hear something that isn't quite right? Because I will give you a listen to the soundtrack and sound effects, because I think they're working great as well. But this is just a game that feels like it should. From my memory, everything looks right, everything sounds right. Maybe, like I said, there's something I'm just not noticing, so leave me that comment down below. But it's another game that didn't used to boot on the Sega Saturn core, but now does. Listen to the audio for like 45 seconds, see how you think it is, and I'll be right back. Enjoy! Looks exactly like I would expect, sounds exactly like I would expect, and it plays excellently. So if you're looking for a fun game to test on the core, Thunder Force 4 is definitely a good one. Now, one that was a viewer request and I was pleased to see is people wanted to know if Worms was working. It seems like people either love or hate the Worms series. I grew up playing it, and let me tell you, you think you're sitting down for one match and suddenly 3 hours has gone by. If you have friends over, it's an awesome game to play. You can teach someone how to play it in like 10 to 20 seconds. So if you're looking for a fun 2D multiplayer game, Worms has your back. Speaking of fun 2D multiplayer games, and everyone was asking me to test this, was NBA Jam Tournament Edition, and for the most part it's working exactly like I would expect. You'll see a few visual glitches here, but the biggest glitch of all is if you don't choose John Stockton and Karl Malone to play as, you have made a mistake. Stockton is GOAT. That is the end of the argument. I will hear no difference, but leave me a comment down below because I'm sure you do disagree. The audio on this one can sometimes be a little bit scratchy and the audio levels may sometimes clip, but as far as actually playing NBA Jam is concerned, this is exactly how I would expect it to work. And it's a great example of the 2D processing of the Sega Saturn using those VDPs, because it's always fun to test pure 3D games, pure 2D games, and games that utilize both of those visual styles to see exactly how everything's going together. I tested this probably early November, maybe late October, and I could not get it to boot into game whatsoever, but now it's working how I would expect NBA Jam to work, so you can definitely play it. Speaking of 2D sports games though, a lot of people requested Fire Pro Wrestling 6-Men Scramble, and I know there's a huge fan base for these games. I played them, I'm not great at them, but I understand why everyone's asking for them, And the good thing is, in my experience playing this game on the MiSter FPGA core, it just works. It sounds good, it looks good, there's no visual glitches, the controls are responsive. The only thing in my opinion that's not working is the actual mechanics of Fire Pro Wrestling. This game always stumps me. I never feel like I can get the inputs in as I should, and the kind of 45-degree angle that the ring is at always kind of confounds me from the visual screen space. But a lot of people asked if this game was working, more so than some of the games that I would expect more people to ask for, so it's nice to see there's a huge fan base out there for Fire Pro Wrestling. I'm happy to test anything you guys ask, and leave me comments down below to see what I should test next. One game that unfortunately I still cannot get to boot, even though there are reports of it working, is Street Fighter Alpha 02. It just does not get anywhere for me. I get to arcade mode and I get stuck at now loading. So if you have success with this, leave me a comment down below and tell me what RAM variation you're using if you're on single or double, because we are kind of tracking who's using what. Now loading up another game here, you'll see kind of the menu. I don't usually show this to you, but I will say that a lot of times mashing start through FMVs is a benefit to try to get things working, but still, Outrun is just a no-go for me. No matter what I do, I cannot get it past this black screen, and a lot of other users have reported the same. Now on the janky 90s 3D front, we have Mech Warrior 2, and this one just seems to work. It's exactly playing how I remember it, although it's been probably 20 years since I played it. The audio sounds good, the controller is responsive, and the frame rate is kind of the frame rate you would get when you played 3D Sega Saturn games back in the day. It's just not something that's ever going to run at 60 frames a second, but it's showing everything working at once, those 2D elements for the sky and the ground, and I will say that this sounds really, really good. So go ahead and listen for like 35 seconds, and I'll come back and tell you the best game I tried. Enjoy!
Destroy HPG uplink. Successful. Enemy mech destroyed.
Just plays and sounds like you would expect. But I will say, of this entire test, this video right here, Virtua Fighter Remix was my favorite experience. Even if it did freeze, and even if it's probably not the best running game of this current batch of tests, this is a game that I have played so much. I got this when I owned a Sega Saturn back in the 90s. It is in my collection now, and I do still play it from time to time. So even though, like I said, this might have some glitches and it might freeze here and there might not be any audio whatsoever, it shows that the Saturn is handling the gameplay on the FPGA. This plays like I would expect Virtua Fighter Remix to play, and that's all that really matters. It even loads in until you get to like the third match, and you'll see here it does freeze on occasion, but I'm willing to forgive that because it plays like I would expect, and that's what I'm looking for. This core feeling like a Sega Saturn, and it is getting that much better. We don't know when the next update will come. Obviously, SRG 320 has a lot of things going on. It might be next week, it might be next month, and it might be 6 months from now. We need to be patient, but in the meantime, I'll continue to test this core. Leave me a comment down below and tell me the next batch of games you want to see, and I'm happy to repeat some from earlier in the series if you want as well, so leave that comment down below. Short of that, it's shaping up great on MiSter for Sega Saturn. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.